Welcome to Off the Page, the show where we talk with Colorado authors to get the story behind the story. I'm Stacy McKenzie, a librarian here at Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Public Library in Broomfield, and today we have an author who's not really a Colorado author, but he wrote about a wonderful place we have here in Colorado. He wrote about Magic Mountain. He's also got a book called Pleasure Island and one about Freedom Land. We're going to find out what all of those things are when we talk with Bob McLaughlin. Hello, how are you today?
Oh, I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you. And we'll say Robert McLaughlin, so we know that that's the name of the title that people can find the books through, but I'm going to call you Bob. Is that okay?
That's what my mother called me.
Yeah, okay. That works out great. So what we're talking about today are theme parks, amusement parks. What is a better term?
Big theme parks.
Theme parks. So we have different themes for each of the three that we're going to talk today. And when people talk about theme parks, we often think of Disneyland.
Correct.
So let's start with what everybody knows. Disneyland. Was that the first theme park?
Yeah, amusement parks actually started around the turn of the century. We call them trolley parks. Of course, they were there before that, but the trolley parks were actually built at the end of the trolley lines to shore up the revenue for the trolley companies who were paying for electricity, even though they weren't. Nobody was using those trolleys on weekends. So they would build a park at the end of the trolley line and utilize those, and then everybody would go to the trolley parks on the weekends, and then, the trolley companies were making money 7 days a week.
Wow.
And then we went into, and then a lot of those parks evolved into the traditional parks that we know of today, like out in Sandusky, Cedar Point was a trolley park, for instance. And but boy, I'll tell you, everything changed with Walt Disney back around 1953. They decided they were going to build something completely different. And of course, trolley parks were always built either on the ocean, or most of the parks were built on the oceans or by a lake or something like that. Walt Disney changed the rules. They built this thing in the middle of a bunch of fields, and so they created their own lakes or their own mountains, and that really set the trend for what we call now theme parks.
So as we go forward, and we're talking about your parks that you studied, we're going to be bringing up a word that's not Disney. C.V. Wood.
Correct.
Tell me about who was C.V. Wood.
C.V. Wood was working in Los Angeles for the Stanford Research Institute when Walt and Roy were looking for a location to build their park and how to build it and who to hire. And so C.V. Wood was running the team for that particular project, that endeavor for Stanford Research. Walt and Roy were very happy with the study that they finally came out with and hired C.V. Wood as their very first vice president. C.V. Wood was really involved with most of the aspects, many of the aspects of putting Disneyland together. He was like I said, very first vice president. Yeah. And boy, he was very young. He was early. He was only 35 when Disneyland opened up. And so he was actually the very first general manager of Disneyland after it opened up also. Subsequently, he had a personality issue with Walt Disney. They both did. Very, very, very high-heeled, very strong personalities, both of them. A lot of conflicts. Some other stuff came down, and and it was really kind of interesting. Can I just show this one book about this?
Sure.
Because this will really explain a lot of it. A friend of mine wrote this book right here. It's called 3 Years in Wonderland by Todd James Pierce. Just came out in March, I believe. It's almost 300 pages, and it basically lays out the whole story about C.V. Wood and Walt and Roy and how they put Disneyland together and all the stuff that it took to get through there. Very, very hard project to get through, and but it's a great book. And of course, that at the ending of that book is really the beginning of our books, because C.V. Wood, he got let go from Walt Disney. Roy and Walt, particularly Walt, let him go after Disneyland opened up, months after that park opened. And C.V. Wood started a company called Marco Engineering, and to go out and be a consultant, basically, and to go out there. And if you're an investor anywhere in the country, you would, they would come in with a whole team, and they would design your park. They would do the market survey. They'd even run it for the first season. There was a whole concept for these guys, and they wanted to build 20 or 30 of these, parks across the country. So basically, you'd have your regional Disneylands, because most of us, including myself, when we were growing up, we were never going to get to Disneyland. So that's where C.V. Wood and Marco, that's where he got his start.
Okay, this is fascinating.
It's a great story.
As you've been mentioning, things like the marketing plan,
Mm-hmm.
I've been noticing that you are not, we mentioned you weren't from Colorado.
Yes.
You have a lovely accent. Where are
thank
you
you.
from?
Well, I was born in Ipswich, Massachusetts. I grew up in Lynn, which is a couple of towns over from Wakefield, Massachusetts, where I live now. And my wife and I, and we've got 4 kids, 5 grandchildren. We've lived in Wakefield for about 30-something years now. And literally, oddly enough, Wakefield just happens to be home of Pleasure Island, which was the park that came in right after Magic Mountain, also designed by Marco Engineering.
And what got you to be to a point where you're going to write a book? What was the impetus for all of these wonderful books?
Well, I didn't get up in the morning and said, gee, I think I'm just going to write a book. It all started out very innocently in 2000. In March of 2000, I was on the planning board in Wakefield, and I went to a little church antique show to get a painting for one of our members that was leaving. And all our board members were going to sign it. So I was waiting in line. I was looking at some postcards a guy was selling, and I came across a set of postcards, Pleasure Island postcards. And I go, why don't we just, I had a friend of mine who had a computer home-based business, and I says, I called her up, I says, Corey, I got some postcards from Pleasure Island. Why don't you come over and we'll blow them up on your computer and I'll put them on the information stations around Lake Quannapowitt. Meantime, I'll get a little information on it. That's literally how the whole thing started. 9 postcards, and 16 years later in 5 books, here we are.
Wow.
It's crazy.
From postcards.
Exactly.
That's exciting. And from the postcards,
Yes.
There's an organization now, a group formed?
Well, we got, again, the whole thing just kind of started and it kind of snowballed, but I was able to find a guy named his name is Bill Hawks, lived up in Gloucester, Massachusetts. He was the guy that really he was the guy that put Pleasure Island together. He was the one that he got the investors together, they hired Marco Engineering. They combined with a company called Cabot and Forbes that actually owned the land, plus a construction company to build the park. The 3 of those guys joined forces. I was able to find Bill Hawks just through the phone book. There was a couple of Hawkses up there, and I just kept on dialing until I get the right one. And his wife answers the phone, and one thing led to another. They ended up donating their entire collection to us, and because of that, Corey and I created a 501(c) to receive this. They got a tax write-off, and we got some really cool stuff, including stuff for Magic Mountain and Freedom Land, wreckage and stuff like that. And so that's how Friends of Pleasure Island started, and it still exists today.
That's amazing. That's
and I get
marvelous.
to be president because I started it.
Yeah, you get to be president. That's marvelous. So let's talk about your first book, Pleasure Island. Tell me about how you decided to create a book and how you put it all together.
Well, first of all, when I first got into this thing, I just assumed there was a book. And I started going to libraries, or at least magazine articles or something, and I couldn't find anything. Nobody had ever done the history of Pleasure Island, which is kind of weird, but that's what I found. So I started poking around. I asked a couple of guys that I did know that have Disney websites or something like that, if they'd be interested in writing a book, and I'd feed them the information. I have dyslexia. I have a real problem writing anything, even a letter. I'm probably the last person on the planet that should ever be writing a book, but I know how to lay it out and all the other stuff. But just physically going onto a keypad just doesn't work. I have to hand print everything, so it just takes a lot longer, but you can get it done.
Yeah.
And so I had a couple of guys that were going to do that, and they just stalled it. They're a year and a half later, and I'm trying to do interviews, and we were literally losing people. I mean, people were getting elderly, and and I'm losing these interviews. So I just sucked it up, and I called Arcadia Publishing, and I says, I've had several of their books over the years, and I says, I'd love to do a book on Pleasure Island. We filled out the application form, went through the whole review process, and voila, my first Pleasure Island book with Images of America came out in 2009 for the 50th anniversary of Pleasure Island. And so then, because I did that one, and since Pleasure Island was back-to-back with Freedom Land, which was the 3rd park after Magic Mountain out in the Bronx, I decided to do a book for their 50th anniversary. Hooked up with a guy out in the Bronx that had a bunch of photographs that he got when the park shut down. They were all in-house photos, and that was also Images of America. That was my 2nd book, and then I was off to Magic Mountain.
Yeah, Magic Mountain. Let's talk about. So the order of your books is actually different than the order of
Correct.
of how they were built. So explain the order of the theme parks being built?
Okay. When Marco Engineering first started up, you know, their first commission, road commission, they were doing some other stuff, and they were involved in a whole bunch of different other industries. Let's put it this way. But this was the main one. Right around the same time Disneyland, opened up, there was a guy down there, actually right here, Wheat Ridge, Colorado, and by the name of Francis Cobb. He was a plumbing contractor. He wanted to build a children's recreation park, really like kids, I mean, and just absolutely wanted to build a children's park, which were being built all over the country, like a Mother Goose Park, you know, with a big Paul Bunyan or a, just a whole bunch of different concepts. But that was the park. It wasn't going to be a Disneyland park, but this is, and he had a friend, John Sutton, who he was an artist and a designer, and so those two guys put this park, they put this package together, Magic Mountain Incorporated. They had a board of directors, and I don't know exactly how it happened. I don't think well, I honestly don't know how it happened, but somehow or other they connected with Marco Engineering. Okay. There was a connection. And the next thing you know, this park went from a storybook park to a Disneyland type park. And it was going to be the first one in the entire country after Disneyland. And it was. I mean, it was clearly designed to be absolutely, without a doubt, a Disneyland type park, no doubt about it. And that was the first one.
And that was which year?
And that was 1957 when this all happened. If anybody knows where Rolling Hills Country Club is, that's where that park was originally going to be built. That was that, they bought that land, and that was the original site for Magic Mountain. That was called Parcel 1. And Applewood was a subdivision at that time, and Applewood, the residents in Applewood met at the Rolling Hills Country Club, which is now Applewood Country Club. Yeah. And they had a big meeting one night right after after the announcement, and they says, you know what, we don't want that traffic. We don't want the Disney traffic, messing up our lives. You know, we don't want this, period. So what happened was Cobb and his guys, they didn't need the time like it was going to take to fight this. So they just bought a 600-acre ranch outside of Golden, out to the west, which is where currently Heritage Square sits. But that was originally the Magic Mountain site, 600 acres, and they started building that in '57, with the intent to get it opened by '58. That was the attempt. It never happened. You know, and of course at the same time they're building it, they're also raising money $1 at a time by selling stock. But you had to be from Colorado, because the Hathaway company that was doing this was only licensed to sell stock in Colorado. And so consequently, but they did end up, they sold almost $3 million, about $3.5 million dollars worth of stock for this project. A
lot in '57.
And they continued construction through '58. Didn't open. They constructed all the way through. I mean, all the way through. But even by the 1960 season that they officially opened, you know, where they were open 7 days a week, it only lasted that one season.
Wow.
It was a wow.
Wow, only one season.
Yeah, they opened they got the train running in Actually, in '58 they had some of the stuff going, and they would open the park up on weekends for investors to come in, and poke around, and basically they had salesmen up there trying to sell stock. So they'd open it up on weekends, and people could go up there and actually see how this thing is being built. Completely different from Disneyland, where they opened the park up. It was hypothetically it was supposed to be all done, but at least they could get the park open on that 1 year schedule, but not Magic Mountain. It was completely it was just very difficult for these guys to do this, and they had management changes, and they had a bunch of different ownerships and stuff, but they did get the train up and running on July 4th. Big train, 3-foot narrow gauge, 7,500 feet of track, had a big dog leg. Not like people realize that at Heritage Square, it was twice as long, because it went all the way around on the other side that you can't see. And so that was the story. It just it shut down Labor Day weekend 1960.
What was the next theme park of our three that we're talking about?
Well, Pleasure Island, they started building Pleasure Island in 1958. All this was going, same Marco Engineering. Bill Hawks, again, out from Gloucester, Massachusetts. His park was originally going to be Child Life World. Very mirrors the Cobb, concept, where he was going to build like a Child Life park, a Storyland type of a park called Child Life World. And again, he hooked up with CV Wood. And again, the thread that was going across here was CV Wood they were doing two things. They were giving him cost estimates to build the park, which were unrealistic. And but these guys didn't know because they're talking to the expert. This is the guy that built Disneyland. So they just assuming that he knows exactly what's going on. And then the other thing is the number of people that were projected to come to the parks. And they were way off. So overinflated, and so consequently, Pleasure Island went bankrupt the very first season. It opened in 1959, and it was June 22nd, quite frankly, and and it was way over budget. And so consequently, they resold the park. It went into bankruptcy. Some guys grabbed it for 20 cents on the dollar, but the next 3 years, when those guys owned it, it was one of the 3 top grossing parks in the entire country. Pleasure Island was kicking. It was cooking. They opened up with the Three Stooges in 1960. They had Ricky Nelson there. They had everybody and their brother was playing there. All the big bands were over there. It was crazy. Plus, they had a big plastic whale. It was a big Moby Dick, 50-foot whale, came charging out of the water. All the kids and the guys were on whaleboats, and of course, all the narration, scaring the heck out of everybody. It was pretty cool with a couple of dark rides. But it mirrored a lot of the stuff that was either at Magic Mountain or didn't get built at Magic Mountain. They brought out the Pleasure Island. And then, of course, the third park was Freedomland, which opened in 1960. And that was the biggest park in the country, bigger than Disneyland. 85 acres on a 205-acre site, and they took the entire country and shrunk it to 85 acres, and you walked through 200 years of history. It was broken down into 7 different regions. They had music themed out for the whole thing. They had everybody in costumes, and if you were a kid, you literally walked through 200 years of history. You went through little old New York. You went through Chicago. You actually put out a fire. You went on a sternwheeler. You went out to the Great Plains. There's Colorado folks. Little plug. They actually had some cattle out there, and then you went up to the Northwest and you went on that boat ride, which is the equivalent of the jungle ride, which like Freedomland was supposed to have. Excuse me. Magic Mountain was supposed to have, and they had $450,000 into that river ride over to Magic Mountain, and it was never completed, unfortunately. But as a matter of fact, some of that animation actually ended up out at Freedomland. And then you went down to San Francisco. You went down to it was great. You went around the whole country, and you landed in the future down in the Florida region, and it was all geared to the space industry. And they had the Moon Bowl. It was just crazy. And but all 3 parks, Freedomland lasted 5 years, and then it went in the dumpster. 5 seasons, a lot of money. And then Pleasure Island was the one that lasted the longest. That went for 11 seasons. It went through 4 different owners, and then of course we go back to Magic Mountain, which sat there for about 3 years. While they were trying to fool around with how are we going to do it. They had all these liens, construction liens, and it was just crazy. And so by 1963, that park was auctioned off. The land, the 600 acres, was busted up into 5 different parcels, and one of the parcels with the improvements, that was Magic Mountain, that got bought by some guys out of Phoenix that had built another park called Legend City, and that didn't work out because Legend City didn't work out. So by 1971, finally Heritage Square, took over.
And what about Heritage Square? Are you going to write a book about Heritage Square?
You're darn right I am, and I need some help, boys and girls. Okay, so I want everybody to get down to their basements and get out those boxes of photographs. I know you have, and help Uncle Bob out, because that's how we're going to do it. And that's exactly how we did. That's how I was able to gather photographs and information for Magic Mountain, was with a lot of help from a lot of different people. And Magic Mountain, fortunately, Magic Mountain, even though it didn't quite succeed, it really, if we didn't have Magic Mountain and the foresight that Francis Cobb had, we wouldn't have never had a Heritage Square. And if we didn't have a Heritage Square, we wouldn't have had 45 years of seasons up there. Wow. With an opportunity for an awful lot of people to own their own businesses, an opportunity for a lot of kids to work up there at that park, an opportunity for an awful lot of people to go out, go on the Alpine Slide. I mean, just you name it. And just to be clear, the park is not closed. Heritage Square is closed, but the amusement park, Heritage Amusement Park, is in the Garden Grill. They're open till 2039 because that's where their lease runs. So it's not completely closed.
That's good. Clarify that. It's not completely closed.
Exactly.
Well, if someone did have something they wanted to get to you or some information about Heritage Square, could they contact you through your website?
Yes, if you go to my website, right on our homepage, we have got all my contact information, either email. I love to talk to people. Just call me on my cell phone. 3 o'clock in the morning is fine. I've got nothing to do. Just give me a call, and anytime, seriously.
You're dedicated.
Yeah, we're dedicated.
Yeah.
I plan on coming out at least a couple of times for that project, quite frankly.
Well, great. Well, I hope you love Colorado and you'll come back and visit.
We love Colorado.
Plenty.
This is my 9th trip out here, and I'm telling you, we love this place.
Tell me a little bit about all the research that you had to put into these books.
I'll tell you, when you're researching, well, number one, I didn't go to school for this. Number one, I'm an electrician, right? I graduated from vocational school, went right straight to work, was on the Seabees for a couple of years, and then so I've been an electrician all my life. I didn't go to school to be an historian. So this has just been a real passion. It's a lot of fun. It's literally like CSI. It's like opening up, and just looking in and trying to figure out how did all this stuff happen, and then trying to figure out, how do you pull this together, and how do you find all this information? One of the things I did was I started eBay has been a wonderful thing. Not too good for my pocketbook, but it's been a lot of fun to pick this stuff up. There's a business amusement magazine that Billboard put out, lots and lots of information, so I was able to pick up a lot of those on eBay, and that's really been a big help. Microfilm has been, I go to the libraries. I spent an awful lot of time in Denver over at the Western Collection, and that's another way of getting it. And then, of course, searching for various people that I know through microfilm that maybe they're around, maybe they're not, and I've got a hold of a lot of people, and and then literally flying around when I have to. I bring my camcorder with me, and we do interviews. So it's a combination of interviews, and of course, when you're interviewing, sometimes you actually know what the answers are because you have it. You have it right on microfilm. But then you just basically, it's like a double source. So you get it. You get it right out of the horse's mouth. And boy, I'll tell you, it's really exciting. Magic Mountain was the toughest one out of the 3 parks.
Oh yeah, why is that?
Because just the mere fact that the park had such a short life, trying to get a hold of photographs, and it was just they came from a lot of different sources. I have to tell you, Leroy Allen, who is a deputy marshal up at the park, and Monty Pike, who was a marshal, and also he was the assistant to Francis Cobb from the get-go. Fortunately, they had a wealth of information and photographs that I was able to access. So about a quarter of the photos in Magic Mountain came from that collection. And we've also got a guy, I took a train ride up there at Heritage Square, talked to Rich Purcell. He was driving the train. He's been doing it for he was doing it for 8 years up there. Rich, do you know anybody that's got any photos? Oh, I know a guy out in California that might have some. His dad took some. And we got a bunch of them, and the photo on the cover came from that conversation. And it was just, you could do writing a book about trying to find this stuff. But you put it all together, lay it all out in a storyline, and voila, there you go.
The books do have so many images in it. It really gives you such a great visual that you can get a little more into the parks. So did you have people donate these pictures? Did you just find them? Well,
again, some of them were donated. Some of them I bought licenses for.
Okay.
In other words, the Denver Public Library, the Western Collection, they had some in their collection. For a nominal fee, you can buy a license for those. And I got some from another outfit in California that had some great train photographs. We have a whole chapter just on trains in here. And so I was able to get those. eBay for my Freedom Land book, about probably 50-60% of those photos I got on eBay.
Wow.
For my Pleasure Island book, and I just have to tell you that my Pleasure Island and my Freedom Land book, those are my second books, because this is a different. These are in color. My first 2 books were in black and white. Right,
yes.
so this is a completely different series that just came out
so
in
much
January.
Better.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. They look terrific. And so I was able to. I got a phone call. That's why my second book from Pleasure Island really came out. I got a random phone call from the people that own the camera shop at Pleasure Island for 3 years. For the first 3 years, they were the official photographer for Pleasure Island. And I get this random phone call, hey, we're moving, we got a bunch of stuff we want to get rid of, are you interested? And I went over there and I bought, you know those things that you stick your heads through at the, and people take their pictures. I bought all those that they had from Pleasure Island, which was really cool because, I mean, literally, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people stuck their heads through those. And then also, but they also had, I bought about 700 negatives. You know, they didn't know what they were selling. I didn't know what I was buying. I just went over there with some cash and we just walked out the door and I'm going like, wow. And I started looking at these negatives and I'm going, this is great. And these are photos that I didn't have when I did my first book. So I called my editor up. I says, has anybody ever done a book on the same subject, like twice? And they says, well, not necessarily, but we'll look into it for you. And they let me. We went through the process, and they let me do it. And then right around the same time, they were coming out with this color version, Images of Modern America, or Modern Images of America, depending on what my dyslexia is going today.
Right.
And anyway, so we ended up doing that. I did that book on Pleasure Island because I did that one. I decided to go back, revisit Freedom Land, and do that one in color.
Yes.
And that's the order's a little scrambled. And then I went back and did Magic Mountain.
I see. And thank you. A lot of people want to thank you for doing this book on Magic Mountain.
Well, you're very welcome.
And we will be extremely excited about Heritage Square because Heritage Square had 45 seasons and these others had a smaller, shorter seasons. How is this approach going to be different?
Well, it's going to be it's more recent history for starters.
Yes, for sure.
Very recent. We're starting 1971, but we're really actually sort of dipping back into the magic because again, Magic Mountain was the bones to Heritage Square. And it's going to be kind of interesting because Heritage Square had been flipped several different times, lots of different owners. So I have to see if we can weed through that. We had 2 generations of trains at Heritage Square. We had a 2-gauge, narrow gauge railroad, and we also had the one that started back around about the mid-90s, which was the 15-inch gauge. So for all you train guys out there, we have a lot of train stories. Then you get the Alpine Slide, then you get the traditional amusement park, and then of course you've got all the businesses and the stores going in and out of there. It's a really long, it's a kind of a cute story. We're going to put it together again with about 160 images. On 95 pages, and we'll have several, probably 4 or 5 different chapters, and and I kind of lay it out in my head, and then we look at the images that we have, and I've got everything I could get out of the Denver Public Library files. I've already got quite a bit of stuff on that project right now, and then we'll come back out, we'll do some interviews, talk to some of the original store owners, and I think it's a great subject. It really is. I'm really happy to do it. I'm honored to do it.
Once you finish the Heritage Square book, do you already know what's next?
Gee, my wife's here, so I don't know. I don't know. I'll tell you one thing. I would love, I don't think anybody's really done a really great book on Lakeside or Eleges. I mean, I believe they, and I don't know that for a fact. Okay, they certainly haven't done an Images of America book, and I believe there may be a couple of books out there, and I'm going to research that. But I think it would be kind of cool, both of those parks. I mean, they've been around for a while.
Our population would love to see more books on all of our fun stuff in Colorado.
It's great.
Bob, thank you so much for coming and sharing these wonderful books with us, especially our own Magic Mountain and soon to be Heritage Square. I really appreciate you sharing these books with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it very much.
You bet.
Okay, great.
I'd like to thank Bob McLaughlin for being on the show with all 3 of his books about wonderful theme parks, especially Magic Mountain. Check your local libraries for the books that we've talked about on today's show, and join us for more next time on Off the Page.